Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Forest Space. Thanks for joining us for today's event, live from Rotterdam, live at the Research Station at the WdKA Academy. We have Surahbi Ghosh Aaron McIntosh presenting research in progress. This is part of an ongoing collaboration with the WdKA Academy and Concordia with Forest Space, and we're really excited to be able to connect. But I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Chichage, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Forest Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-create daily activities, examining research questions and projects that are happening all across the university and elsewhere. We're running today's event as a live stream to both YouTube and to Zoom. And if you have any comments or questions, those are fantastic. Please pop those into the chat in the Zoom. We'll do our best to get them later into the conversation later on. Those of you here with us in the space, if you have any comments or questions, raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over to you. Okay. With that, it's very much my pleasure to hand things over to the course director for Masters of Fine Art at the Piet Zwart Institute at the WdKA Academy, Daniel Gilles. Daniel, over to you.
Yeah.
We're good.
We're live now.
We are live. Hi, Aaron.
Right. Now we're currently in Rotterdam, right?
Yes.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Should I look into the camera? Hello. Hi, Montreal. Hi, Montreal. Hi, everyone here. My name is Danny Giles, the course director of the Master of Fine Art here at the Piet Zwart Institute, WdKA Academy. Really happy to be here with Aaron McIntosh and Surahbi Ghosh from Concordia in Montreal. And can you hear a bit about their research and practice? This is an ongoing collaboration of teaching and research between our two schools, hosted right now in the Research Station of the WdKA Academy. And tonight we're just going to hear a bit from Aaron and Surahbi and a bit from, I think, the audience in Montreal and also from you all here. So I think I'll just read a bit from their biographies and then they'll take it from there. So I'll start with Surahbi Ghosh, who is an associate professor of fibers and material practices at Concordia University and the current chair of the Department of Studio Arts. Surahbi is an artist and educator based in Montreal. She exploits the tensions and imperfections in handmade patterns to give material and spatial form to cyclical narratives of pride and shame. Her visual strategies for promoting, for prompting active viewership involve inverting the central and the peripheral, interrupting architectural edges, and the disrupting the functionality and familiarity of everyday materials. Tonight, Surahbi's going to speak a bit about mapping points of intersection between abstraction, minimalism, and ornamentation, speculating on the critical potentials found via material-based art praxis. Surahbi's methods include repurposing textiles, patterning with repetitive processes, and creating site-responsive installations. Arguing that art making is a fundamental mode for interdisciplinary research, Ghosh builds a web of connections between textile objects, gendered narratives, global migration, and nationalist ideologies, as well as cultural diasporas. Now a bit about Aaron McIntosh, who's a cross-disciplinary artist and fourth-generation quilt maker, whose work mines the intersections of material culture, family tradition, sexual desire, identity politics, and nature studies. Aaron is a 2020 United States Artist Fellow in Craft and is currently research creation project, his current research and creation project, Hot House / Maison Chaude, has been supported by 2020 2023 SSRC Insight Development Grant. Since 2015, McIntosh has managed invasive queer kudzu, a community of storytelling and archive projects across 2S LGBTQ plus Southern United States. And oh, he currently lives in Montreal, obviously, and is here where he is associate professor of and coordinator of Fiber and Material Practices program at Concordia. And tonight, Aaron will be speaking a bit about piecework as paradigm, what is inherent in the scrap, the leftover, the salvaged bit. Today, we use the language of sustainability, such as recycling and upcycling, but all global cultures have cherished traditions for using off-cut materials, reforming the discarded into something new. Quilts and other piecework objects are one such material culture with hundreds of variations that tell stories of community, identity, environment, settlement, and colonization. In this talk, Aaron McIntosh will explore the connections to piecework around his projects, invasive queer kudzu, the gloaming, and hothouse maison shawd. So really excited to hear a bit from these two about their practices, and I think we'll have some time for questions from both sides of the live stream after these talks. So I'm gonna hand it over to you two.
It's only, oh, here, this is exactly what I. Yes, we are rolling now. Thank you.
So as Danny was mentioning in reading the bio, but my work is rooted in the material, process, and cultural attributes of quilt making. As a fourth-generation quilter from the Appalachian region of the United States, I carry forward the traditions of my grandmothers and grandfathers. Yes, I had grandfathers and great-grandfathers who were quilters in their communities. In my quilted works, let's see if it's not advancing. I'm just trying to figure that out. I guess we do that. I'm stripping away the quaint Americana charm factory status that these objects hold, peeling back their cultural layers and infusing the medium with the realities of what happens beneath quilts and other kinds of bedding: desire, sex, death, and birth. I enjoy positing my own contemporary queer life, struggles, and politics in this medium, which remains ambiguously on the border of fine and folk arts. In her writing on queerness, archives, and activism, Anne Svetkovich redefines craft as a collective political gesture forged by complex relations to history, which embraces sensory interactions and, especially and foremost, feelings, our sensorial connections to objects. Her writing has spurred me to focus on the collective value of such domestic objects like quilts and the complicated roles that our bedding and other things like furniture objects play in this sensorial realm, but also in the cultivation and formation of our sense of self. Per the title of my talk, and also in relationship to the workshop that we're co-offering tomorrow, but my part in particular, Piecework as Paradigm, I'm really interested in piecework, work with scraps. I really see, I mean, it's not just about what I see, but it is a truly global paradigm. Across time, the production of textiles is historically and continuingly so time consuming, even with industrialization, and meaning accumulated through the wear and ritual of many textiles. They were too valuable to discard, even smallest bits. From Seminole patchwork to Korean bojagi, from Japanese boro to Bengali kanta, from Rosie Lee Tompkins, who's an African-American quilter, to Amish quilters. Can we look to this universal craft language as a cognitive framework for understanding the complex ways that identities are forged by their scraps of connection to other people, to media, and to communities? Piecework itself can be traditional, rigid, or structured. It can be loose, intuitive, encoded with symbolism, and practically illegible at times. I think of identity as similarly accessible. along the lines of crafting. It's something that we work on, obsess over, and we tend to with care. As both a queer person who has made a life choice to not have children, and as a textile educator, I also see passing on these craft skills that I inherited as a way to forge kinship bonds outside the tradition of the birth family. This is a calling I'm committed to. I've been a professor for 16 years, and also teach in other kinds of context. And this manifests from these classrooms to other kinds of occasions to community workshops and quilting bees like the ones pictured here. And these are just a smattering of like some different and recent, like over the last 8 years, like projects with different community organizations. But um, I have developed a kind of a way of doing this work that I call queer quilting bees. Um, and a bee is, yes, like the bee, the insect, but in at least in American context, this is also like a gathering, a social gathering that's been practiced mostly by women folk, but also lots of other people. But it's a kind of gathering together to do work collectively. Um, in today's lecture, I'm going to focus on the ways that my practice utilizes piecework to bring together archives, queer, LGBTQ, and two-spirit communities, botanical knowledge, and queer ecologies. And as you'll see in sort of these three projects that are about to unfold, my work has taken quite a turn towards the botanical over the last decade. And beyond. In 2013, in a two-person exhibition titled Untended, it got me thinking more deeply about my relationship and my family's innate connections to the land, gardening, and ties to the mountains. In Weeds, my interpretation of these disregarded local plants are made queer by their patchwork skins of vintage fabrics and printed gay erotica. I draw a covert line of connection between these unwanted plants of the family garden and my own anxious efflorescence as a queer person in a culture steeped in heteronormative tradition. That's the heteronormative tradition right there. It's after me all the way over here in the Netherlands. This tension between cultivation and disregard, right? So what is propagated or cultivated in the garden, and then what is disregarded or unattended to or intentionally removed from the garden, like the weed. This is a line that runs through these projects that I'm sharing. In 2014, I decided to take on the ultimate southern weed, and by the South, I mean the southern United States, where I'm from, is this kudzu, Pluria lobata. And this is just an image, since you all would probably have very little context for it. It's often considered an environmental nuisance, but it's also a fixture of the landscape. It's very much a part of the Gothic mythologizing of the South. Many famous Southern writers use it as a metaphor for decay and decline of the South. An invasive species imported from Japan at mid-century to control soil erosion, kudzu now engulfs entire landscapes from Virginia to Texas. No, it's actually very different. Yes, it has the same kind of stigma about it, I would say, maybe worse in some cases. Initially, I was making kudzu for myself, indexing my own queer desire through gay literary and erotic materials, also other textiles. So here you sort of see that. Um, but I would kind of very quickly be more interested in the cultural history of kudzu. A lot of weeds are native species that grow on their own. Kudzu has a very long, very complex history of how it ended up in the southern United States, planted as an ornamental plant, and then as an agricultural product, and finally as a soil stabilizer along railroads and roads. In its non-native environment and outside of traditional cultivation, kudzu flourished as a perennial, rapidly naturalizing in its new southern home. Soon enough, kudzu became problematic and was used really to instrumentalize a lot of different programs in the United States, such as the USDA's Noxious Weed Watch List, which became sort of the foundation for the 1998 National Invasive Species Act. This really cemented the plant's status as a much scorned weed in the southern US, and where yearly efforts to exterminate it cost southern states millions of dollars, usually to no effect. I bring it up in this talk because it relates to many other things specific to this project, but other ways of thinking. And I think in a lot of ways, it has a lot of resonance with current United States policies, specifically around immigration. Fred Pierce, an evolutionary biologist, writing in his 2010 text, The New Wild, offers this about invasive species, which is that their demonization says more about us and our fears of change than about them and their behavior. Understandable love of the local, the native, and the familiar too often become fear and hatred of the foreign and the unfamiliar. Kudzu taps into these regional fears of otherness, connecting it in many ways to perceptions of queerness and a persistent fear that a homosexual agenda could sweep across the nation if left unchecked. So these overarching xenophobic overlays of a plant, right? This is sort of humans doing a human thing to a more than human, a non-human, is something that is formative to other projects that I'll share. I really came to believe and still do that queer people and communities in the South are like kudzu. We have thrived in inhospitable soil. Despite efforts to eradicate us, we have persisted. Kudzu's growth is exponential because each vine from a planting can grow over 60 feet in one season. That's nearly a foot a day in early summer, and its roots sometimes stretch over 12 feet into the ground. It's proved to be a formidable enemy to pesticides. So the idea with this project was to really consider how to use that exponential growth factor to grow queer stories in the South, across the South, do coalition building and solidarity work across communities, bring in stories from the past with stories in from the present. In the beginning, I felt charged to create Southern queer kudzu through a historical lens, and this had to do with like my prior work in archives, queer archives specifically. I wanted to both understand the histories of queer Southern identity and look for connections to kudzu's own complex legacies. Anne Svekovich, returning to her, proposes that queer archives, which began in the absence of institutionalized documentation or in outright opposition to official histories, form an archive of feelings, or the collection of cultural texts and objects that serve as repositories of feelings and emotions, which are encoded not only in the context of the text themselves, and by text, this is a very expansive way of understanding that, but in the practices that surround their production and cultural reception. Svetkovich further expounds on trauma, which, because it is often unspeakable and unrepresentable and marked by forgetting and dissociation, often seems to leave behind no records at all. It puts pressure on conventional forms of documentation, representation, and commemoration, giving rise to new genres of expression, such as testimony and new forms of monuments, rituals, and performances that can call into being collective witnesses and publics. As one considers Svetkovich's call for new understandings and new monuments of and for and to trauma, collective projects like the AIDS Memorial Quilt became very important inspirations for the project. And all of these ideas really collided to kind of help me move the project into several directions, but towards building an archive as a kind of monument, like what would that be? And also the development of ways to teach and learn queer Southern history through interactive, touchable stories. That's something that's always so frustrating to work in archives, is to really see them as these implements and instruments of power, and the ways in which they're really kept from public dissemination, public engagement. And also archives in those aspects of being instruments of power often occlude so many important stories. They tend to default to whoever had the time, wealth, and money to put them together, to keep things and save things. So a lot of the archives I would be visiting were, again, managed by these incredible keepers of the flame, like this person, Larry Crisconi, who started and founded and kept a church basement archive for all of Houston and New Orleans queer histories for about 25 years. And also this archive had very small Black African-American presence in it, very little to no like Indigenous presence in it. Also to be in these archives and to be a queer person living of our modern times is to really kind of confront how understandings of gender have evolved to a point where some of the stuff to find in these archives, if not problematic or probably re-traumatizing to propose even within queer communities, doesn't represent where we've been. And where we've come, and along those lines. So I really shifted I realized that this couldn't be a project that looks solely backwards. It really had to be a project that engaged with queer communities right now and let people sort of share what they would want to share. Towards that end, it really it kind of shifted to also rethinking archives altogether, like an archive that might be forming in that moment, and stories colliding from the past and the present, all coming together. So these are some images from some of those, and talking kind of quickly about the project, and it's so I can share other projects, but these are what it comes together as these quilted leaves. People write stories, sometimes like just sharing an aspect of their identity, like how they identify where they're from is like a bold statement for some people. So these are workshops. There are versions where there are like hundreds of people that are engaged at big community events like Pride, and then a lot more very small, intimate moments with smaller groups, senior citizen, sage groups, youth centers, things like that. Sometimes people help make them, and a lot of that work was done with me and assistants in the studio. Every time the project traveled, it had 3 major exhibitions. It's a somewhat ongoing project, but the point would be to actually kind of look at what is a problematic monument in the site that the project is traveling to. And so these are some SketchUps or mock-ups for differently problematic places. The one on the left is the continuing site of a lot of homophobic and anti-woman, anti-abortion legislation is test-driven at the Alabama State Capitol. So that's why it is being taken over. On the right side is one of the more problematic Civil War statues. It's actually now been removed in the town that I lived in at the time, Richmond, Virginia. I'm only going to share images from this one. And the Invasive Queer Kudzu Baltimore exhibition featured a ghostly replica of Baltimore's Club Hippo, reclaimed by these queer Southern stories, memorializing one of the country's oldest continuously operating gay dance clubs, which in 2015 became a CVS pharmacy. Opened in 1972 at the prominent Mount Vernon intersections of North Charles and Eager Streets, Club Hippo became an anchor of the emerging gay community post-gay liberation, and the club's official motto was, "Where everyone is welcome." The Hippo grew to be one of, my notes got stapled in the wrong order, Baltimore's most inclusive spaces, where drag shows, leather competitions, karaoke, gay bingo, and themed events welcomed patrons of all stripes. And so in this recreation, it's like a 2-scale replica of this small corner gay bar. So the wall itself is about 32 feet long. It's hard to get across in these images. And then a column that already existed in the gallery sort of represents this place finding of that famous intersection. The back wall, you can see there are, it's sort of a recreation of a brick wall of posters from events from Baltimore's queer archives over the years. As a monument in memoriam, Invasive Club Hippo Memorial celebrates the power of dance, nightlife, and connection that gay clubs have provided for queer communities for generations. It also points to the decline of such sites as the twin forces of gentrification and social media erode the necessity of queer-only or queer-specific space. And that was the purpose in showing sort of this 40-year history of events at the space. And that is a detail of it. One of the most interesting ironies of kudzu in the United States is that it never invaded. It actually was brought to the United States by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and planted with much significant intention. Kudzu's geographical distribution and journey is but one of millions that humans have embedded in the plant world's domination of our globe. Michael Pollan, writing in his seminal book from 1999, The Botany of Desire, reorders our presumed subjectivity over plants' agency. Pollan makes the case for coevolutions 10,000s of years old between plants and humans, framing mutual benefits formed as plants evolved to satiate our desires, and we in turn evolved to help them reproduce and disseminate. We like to think of domestication as something that we do to other species, but it makes just as much sense to think of it as something certain plants and animals have done to us, a clever evolutionary strategy for advancing their own interest. The species that have spent the last 10,000 years figuring out how best to feed, heal, clothe, intoxicate, and otherwise delight us have made themselves some of nature's greatest success stories. So can we turn around this negative hype on kudzu and see it from a coevolutionary stance? These larger questions about our kinship with plants, with the more than human, is a nice segue to the other project that I'll share, Hot House Maison Chaude. So after these 2 multi-year installations of invasive queer kudzu, I found a renewed thirst for plant knowledge. Digging into medieval herbal guides, reading novels about orchid thieves. I felt, I had transitioned my life and career to Canada, and I was no longer in this site-specific place. And it made sense to really kind of look at all these other things that I would be learning about in this research on the kudzu project. But for instance, just sort of the ways in which plant reproduction unfolds is so different, for instance, than human and mammalian reproduction. Eurocentric nature studies have tended to enforce a patriarchal, Christian, and colonized worldview that centers on biparental, meaning male and female, reproductive capacity and genetic fitness, neglecting the vagaries of sexuality, desire, and pleasure that are detached from procreative reproduction, as well as instances of hermaphrodism, self-fertilization, polyamory, rhizomatism. These are natural histories and convenient omissions that have informed our social context for sexual and gender variation. Until the late 20th century, homosexuality, intersexuality, and non-binary gender expressions have been considered unnatural and either criminalized or institutionalized to bolster natural orders of humankind. Such pathologization of queer bodies has severely limited queer agency within nature studies. On the contrary, the more than human world or other than human world is actually queerer than we were told, or at least I was taught. I think this is changing these days. But while his scholarship is focused on our closer animal kin, biologist Bruce Badgemill has cataloged the multitudes of animal kingdom instances of same-sex relations, from sexual pleasure to pair bonding to parenting. Tucked away at the end of long and erudite text, or consigned to footnotes and appendices, he found that homosexuality had been observed in no fewer than 1,500 species and well documented in 500 of them. He found the earliest mention of animal homosexuality around 2,300 years ago when Aristotle described 2 female hyenas cavorting with each other. His groundbreaking work would have implications much beyond just our understanding of sexual diversity in nature, but also political ramifications. His book, Biological Exuberance, was cited by the American Psychiatric Association and many other global groups to strike down sodomy laws, right? So in essence, the heteropatriarchal Christian worldview that homosexuality can't exist, queerness can't exist because it's not natural. This person set out, and his life's work was in defeating that premise. And so, the very fields of biology and medicine have been used to pathologize our bodies and codify homophobia. We saw this in the Victorian era concept of the invert, and queerness has so long been construed as a biological misalignment. And the more I would learn about plants, but also just nature studies in general, and it's really a reflexive process to come back and understand what were my own learnings, teachings about sexuality, about gender. Like, they are so informed by not just what my grade school teachers taught me, but these much longer histories about how nature is formed, studied, and taught. And so I came to be interested in how we can flip this paradigm. How can we imagine queerness differently, informed by actually these nature-based undercurrents? If queerness is everywhere in nature, percolating there, how can we look at these gender diverse variants in the animal and plant worlds? And this is one of the core ideas in the emergent field of queer ecology. Catriona Mortimer Sandilands and Bruce Erickson, in their anthology, Queer Ecologies, Sex, Nature, Politics, and Desire, argue that we should reorient our politics and take on something like a queer ecological perspective, a transgressive and historically relevant critique of dominant pairings of nature and environment with heteronormativity and homophobia. They're equally critical of the continued organization of metrosexualities based on environmentally disastrous and often ethically void lifestyle consumerism. And they really advocate for a way of kind of not only queering greening queer politics, but also sort of like greening our ecocultural relations within queerness. As someone who grew up in a rural place, a lot of these writings really resonated with me for also just doing a better job of dissociating queerness with metrosexualities, with the primacy of queers gathered in metropolitan areas, and really look at sort of the ways that queerness flourishes everywhere. And so with this queer ecological frameworks guiding this next body of research, again, wanted to keep working on this distortion of common understandings of the natural, recenter and just simply center queerness within a spectrum of plant-based, non-normative, and non-reproductive sexual and expressive capacities. In 2020, I began this project, Hothouse Maison Chaude, which is both a series of related artworks as well as a structural and theoretical container for them. The project references the greenhouse or hothouses of the 19th century, projecting world-building potential into a structural form built to simultaneously protect and nourish growth of rare species. Informed by the biosphere and the Jardin Botanique in Montreal, but querying the concept of cultivation and propagation, this hothouse is envisioned as a fertile space for initiating new queer dialogues. Hothouse is, of course, also a reference to the climate crisis we grow closer to every day, and sort of this bigger thinking of around kinship. How will we take care of, like, not just ourselves humans, but everything other living on this planet, and look for sustainable and reparative ways to live better with our more than human companions. I'm interested in sort of, again, how the natural world has been built in terms of knowledge production that centers heterosexual relations and reproduction. And these unjust legacies of biological determinism might be dismissed by looking more closely at these variances that exist in the plant world. And so recognizing the implications for queer world making as it encounters the heteronormative, colonial imperatives, and as well as colonial imperatives of botany, this project is informed by critical readings in ecofeminism, queer ecology, and ethnobotany, along with science fiction and many other archive studies, other fields. It unfolds in 3 acts, and the last images I've been showing are an exhibition that's currently up in Montreal, and anyone in Montreal is actually listening to this, please go to it. It's at the FOFA Gallery in the EV building until December 12th. It's also an selection of text are on display at the Webster Gallery downtown. The first act, it unfolds in these 3 acts. In the first act, Q Matter, is an ongoing collaboration in a queer archiving project that was launched in 2021 with a zine that was mailed to Two-Spirit and queer people across Turtle Island or North America, inviting contributions of queer ephemera for a collective compost pile. In response, the project received t-shirts, punk zines, flyers from pride events, underwear, leather scraps, letters from friends and lovers, hankies, hormone packaging, and eventually later, les Archives Gays de Québec contributed printed matter, testifying to the history of Quebec's own queer communities. These fragments of organic matter and the intimate memories they hold become the beginnings of this queer compost heap. And so this is an image from the zine, and I actually brought zines to pass around, and I did not bring them today, but anyways, they'll be here tomorrow. Challenging the protocols of archival classification and the authority they sustain, I create a living archive that attends to the vernacular, embodied, and collective knowledges that are often passed furtively between queer generations. For queer theorist Jose Esteban Munoz, queerness is not yet here. It's a horizon glimpsed in traces, glimmers, residues, and performative gestures that endure when visibility might invite harm. Q-Matter gathers these traces, transforming them into queer compost that nourishes botanical desires and queer kin making. Instead of preserving histories in conventional forms, I hasten the decomposition of these material traces of queer lives, yearnings, and dreams, pulping them into contributed materials, creating sheets of paper, and printing them with compost-activating bacteria. They're further cut into silhouettes of Two-Spirit and LGBTQ icons, protest, and moments of intimacy. These abstracted forms resist recognition at times, evoking the tangled presence of queer histories across our time. These traces become vectors that are layered here in a compost bin, cut into the greenhouse glass, collaged onto the wall, added to the potting mix of nearby plants. Resembling piles of fallen leaves, these dense, textured, decomposing forms, they'll be transformed yet again in a series of participatory workshops. And then they already exist because they've been sent out to queers across Turtle Island in various compost bins, actual compost. And staying with the trouble, Donna Haraway calls for sympoiesis, or making together. We require each other in unexpected collaborations and combinations in hot compost piles. The queer archive is itself a compost heap, complex, fertile, fragmented, alive, and dying all at once. The heat of collaboration breaks down these contributions into new forms, a living archive of care, resilience, and renewal. Q Matter asks how queer memory might be held without being fixed, exploring what it means to create an archive that is partial, unstable, and in transformation. These are some details from it. And these are details from the wall collage, which for me was a way to kind of like the Queer Kudzu project to also really think about situating this project in its own site specificity. So that it's in Montreal. These are images pulled from Montreal's queer communities. And the image on the left, I don't know if it's actually seeable, is exactly what I love when happens when you bring out archives, show them to communities, is that I got a text from a friend who found his former lover like in this installation. And every time I've shown this kind of work, I often get little mementos like that. And so shifting gears to Act 2, Exuberant Botanica, centers on exploring plants that have co-evolved with human sexualities and gender-based medicine. The project takes its name partly from Bruce Badgermill's work, which I shared earlier. And while Western biology and medicine have often pathologized queer bodies, this project flips the narrative by suggesting queerness is rooted again in nature, alongside these patterns that we've already seen in plant life. This is the zine that was shared with people, some of the like historic forms that have shaped the project in many ways, and then some of the contributions that I initially put in the zine that were invites to people to also think about this larger question. I wanted to do two things. This project is both an index of plants that have very strong connections to queer medicine. Would later go down a very strong rabbit path or rabbit hole around like queerness and herbalism. But these are also plants that just by symbolism have connections, like Oscar Wilde's green carnations here. The morning glory has a very complex, interesting queer history. And also an invitation for queer people to consider what ails them. So sort of again along the lines of like medicine and healing within this Exuberant Botanica project, if you could, as a queer person, name what is something that ails you that there is no remedy for, what might that be? And it's maybe a little, you all on the big screen can see it, but these are just, this is a tree of ailments towards the queer herbals. This is a quilted work with different things that people might consider as like what they need healing for. Because what I asked of participants is to like, sort of unpacking some of these like complicated botanic histories, is to also kind of consider what would you invent. So these are some of like the first ones I made, like if we could grow our own sex toys, what that might look like, instead of putting plastic and like petroleum products in our bodies, like how could we like move towards something like a root vegetable? So this is ongoing as well, including on site right now, but people have been invited to, they have a little formula they fill out. They sort of do a drawing about like what their plant might look like, and then they describe it. And these have all been bound into a historic looking herbal. So again, kind of inserting queerness in this history of herbal medicine. And then these are some of the plants that I've made based on what people have submitted. And it's already a long lecture, so I can't give like details on each one, but like this is the kind of entry that people would send. And then this is the kind of plant that I've been making from that. These are all shown in a room that sort of explores, again, like a site of nature studies, right? So There's also really, I've been looking at and studying the last several years, like botanic models, educational models. And so this is a recreation of a 19th century botanic model. These kind were often sort of able to be taken apart and studied by botany students. And also really thinking about, again, these extremely complex histories of botany, especially the colonial exchange between Europe and North and South America. It's impossible to do work within a botanical sphere and not be presented with those histories. And to think about like where is queerness's like site in that. This is a recreation of a Wardian case, which is the kind of transport vehicle for these plants. My Wardian case, in contrast to being closed, is something that plants actually grow through. It's a mix of live plants that have their own queer histories, along with these speculative plants that people have been contributing. Have been thinking about a lot of different plant histories too, and then also in a lot of ways like divining and inventing my own protective charms. Much of like herbal lore and plant lore involves this idea of like how plants might not do anything medicinally in our bodies, but might be a kind of charm for us. Um, this is a view from the outside of the gallery. Again, there's sort of like the cultivation from the herbal apprenticeship program that I'm a part of, along with these other speculative plants, and some details of those. And the very last works that I want to share about are from a project called The Gloaming. During the first few months of the pandemic, I had a nightly series of dreams wherein I saw figures from my life, friends, lovers, family, and unknown people appearing and disappearing amongst a thicket of adumbral plants. The space was not malevolent per se, and not sickened or sad, but more hauntingly obscured. Serendipitously, during this same period, I came across a postcard of Egon Schiele's Sonnenblumen, 1911 painting with its dense column of sunflowers folding into themselves with the flowers pushed under the dark umber green leaves. I pinned it to my studio wall and further pondered it, what it might mean. Several years go by from that time, 4 years, in fact. I'm strolling the Rue Verte, the green alleyway closest to my home, when an off-leash dog lunges at me, and the dog's owner started repeatedly calling me a faggot and threatened to beat me up. In the summer of last year, my partner and I were egged on the streets of Manhattan, actually very close to the LGBTQ center. And these homophobic encounters struck me as offbeat, but then I started hearing from other queer friends that this is actually something that a lot of people are encountering, just like the overt displays of homophobia and transphobia. This erosion of two-spirit and queer protections in North America, Canada, and across the globe really crosses the Rubicon of post-gay liberation, social progress, and the movement towards self-determined personhood that have marked my last 20 years. And in this new body of quilt and collage work, very dismally responding to this cultural and political darkening of our times for queer rights. Those pandemic dreams came back to me. I started imagining and reimagining this like forested retreat or escape from all this phobia and vitriol. The garden has always been a place for my seclusion. But lacking one of my own in Montreal, I headed to Mount Royal Park and lesser kempt wilder spaces in the city. I refamiliarized myself with the gloaming, which is a Scottish term, the time of dusk when the veil of nightfall makes distinctions between figure and landscape indiscernible, as a potent moment of uncertainty, danger, and erotic possibility. As mentioned earlier, in these past 6 years, I've been researching the connections between queer people and plants, and especially like trawling medieval herbal manuscripts, Appalachian folk remedies, indigenous medicine guides, hippie era reproductive pamphlets. I've indexed, several hundred of these plants that I want to own for their speculative queer uses, but some of them have actual herbal medicinal qualities for instance, hormone balancing. Our kinship with herbs is likely deeper, as gay historian author Evans has noted. Queer people throughout time and witches of the European past relied on the healing, psychoactive, and poisonous properties of special plants and saw them as a form of trans-species communion. Many of these plants that safeguarded queer folk, such as oak, elder, angelica, thorn apple, or onions, have been stitched as protective charms in this body of work. It's probably a little hard to see the layers. Actually, it looks pretty good on the screen, but to encounter them and to see them in the gallery space is to really just, they first kind of, on first approach, they look like these darker voids. And emanating as organza background shadows or patchwork protrusions into the foreground, this density of plant talismans obfuscates, entangles, and shelters the images of vulnerable bodies lifted from various queer archives from personal and public collections, such as the Archives Gay de Québec and the Archives in Toronto. Similar to how the darker works surround these freestanding entanglement series, these large freestanding quilts that are potted with the queer compost, the Q matter that I spoke to earlier. The idea was to surround them like a falling dusk. And I see this gloaming as a thin veil of protective cover that might be necessary to survive these times we find ourselves in. The gloaming claims space for nuanced possibilities, acknowledges moments when camouflage and exposure overlap. And these works are simultaneously homespun and carnal. They point to the frenetic nature of cruising culture, searching, eyes darting, forms emerging in and out of recognition, as in the dating app grid, as in quilted patterns, as in the cruising park. Many generations of queers have found sanctuary in cruising, which shifts sexual inhibition away from the legal sanction of the home to the street, the park, the woods. And I'll close with that even in darkness, but perhaps especially in darkness, queers have always found one another. We seek ways to build a counter wild where pleasure emerges in efflorescences. Thank you.
Okay, so I will get started. Thank you, Aaron. First, that was so awesome. I haven't seen you talk in a while. It was really good. Amazing. And thank you to all of you for inviting us here and me here to share my work with you tonight. Special thanks to Sky and Danny and all the tech support. Preparing this talk was a really great pleasure. Preparing a talk is always an opportunity to reflect on what's been going on in your practice. And I'm going to focus on the last 5 years, which have been kind of overwhelmingly busy for my studio and my research. The title of this talk is "What's Mine is Yours." It's a phrase that's been recurring and echoing in my mind during this same time period. So you'll hear it multiple times. So today I'm going to share a series of research questions paired with some imagery that I've been inspired by. Then I'm going to run through a lot of work that's been shown in the past 5 years in very different exhibition contexts. I'm going to be providing a really broad overview of my practice, and afterwards, if you all have questions, I'd be happy to go deeper into anything in response to your questions. So you'll notice two big ideas recurring in everything I make: narrative or storytelling, and repetition and pattern. I strive to continually experiment, investigate, and analyze. These are verbs, they're actions rooted in the curiosity that motivates my multi-pronged practice as an artist, educator, researcher. I formulate questions that allow me to engage with speculative thought, critical analysis, interdisciplinary inquiry, and to always generate further questions. So as an example of that, I'm going to share with you a bunch of questions that sort of go in order. What are the stories that we tell ourselves over and over across great distances and time spans? How do those stories change and why? How does the storyteller understand their social role or responsibility? And how does the audience or listener understand theirs? How does a listener understand a story as history, myth, legend, fable, or fairy tale? How does a listener understand herself as an individual and as part of a group, as part of a we or an us? Who is included in the we, a collective audience, the body politic? And how is that group defined, maintained, and reproduced, from within or from without? When, how, and why does the listener become the storyteller? Does she aim to reproduce or remember? What storytelling mechanisms are used by those seeking to claim or maintain power in order to manipulate and control a social group or social class? How and why is the nation state built into such an effective ordering regime that citizens volunteer to protect it with their lives? Or what are the threats or fears that recur as part of nationalist projects, presumably because of their past effectiveness? How and why are home and homeland variously abstracted, conflated, and kept distinct? And how does that relate to the gendering and racialization of social roles and responsibilities? How and why are pride and shame such effective mechanisms for obfuscating authoritarian attempts at social engineering? How are pride and shame used to provoke essentializing self-identifications with gender, race, class, and ability? Conversely, how can celebrating the complexities and contradictions found in non-essentialized identity formations contribute to transversal and transnational solidarities? How do and how can abstraction and material conditions function as part of nation building and the maintenance of originary myths? Conversely, and increasingly urgently, how might abstraction and materiality be used to bolster abolitionist political efforts? So that was like a string of questions that I wrote in like 5 minutes, and a bunch of source material that I'd be happy to talk more about. So making work that explores concepts like nationalism, gender roles, and cultural diaspora for the past several years has felt at times very urgent and at other times quite futile. I often get overwhelmed. So a few years ago, back in 2018 now actually, I used a process of triangulation to make a map. I was hoping it would help me get lost with intent. So these 3 ideas were central recurring interests. And once I figured that out, I identified some in-betweens. And then a further layer of in-betweens. Next, I thought about words that we use and the words that we hear, or language in context. I thought about words that relate to categorizations imposed on us from outside of our individual selves, and the way we find a sense of belonging from the inside of ourselves. Then I drew a bisecting line. I was wondering about the classic divide of the personal versus the political, or the public versus private realms, which led me to think about contexts. So my last layer was context spatialized, or spaces contextualized. And there it is, it's a map. How can I use this map? Well, for example, I can ask, how does my work relate to self-identity, which can relate to a self-selected identification with a place and a moment in time, which may link to home or family, which may relate to a domestic context, or maybe I could think of a place of origin, which may relate to a geographic location, which for me is multiple. It's Texas, Georgia, and Illinois in the United States. It's Gujarat and Bengal in India, and it's Montreal, which is in Quebec in Canada. Or I can tell this story from the outside in a space between public space and political space. Concepts like race or racial purity are used in a process of mythification, which, if which is often enacted as part of political spectacles that use textiles to create, reinforce, or maintain nationalist ideology. And this has led me to create various artworks unpacking those ideas. Or there's this path that navigates the ways one's self-identity may be manipulated to conform to extremist ideologies built on a logic of us versus them, the results of which can explode into the world in the conceptual space where geography and culture intersect. So this map allows me to pick and choose which pathway is most relevant for a particular moment, or to answer a specific question without ever losing sight of multiplicities, complexities, contradictions, and contexts. So this was my ugly map, and this is the beautiful one that a graphic designer made for me. This is made by my sister, Sujata, who actually lives close to us right now. She's in Bern, Switzerland. So I'm going to move along to talk about context a bit. So specificities of exhibition context have become really important for my work. I do a lot of sculpture, but installation. And so space is important. And the material conditions surrounding an exhibition determines who has permission to engage or not, who is given power or not, who has control or not, who is considered the public or not, if the work receives critical feedback or not, if there's funding or not, if artistic labor is compensated or not. Taken in, Taking On is a project I installed on this entry wall at Montreal's Museum of Contemporary Art while it was closed for the pandemic. And it sat there for 6 months with no one looking at it. And then it opened, it was fine. So in this work, I interpret pattern language and the creation of cultural ideology through repetitive political rhetoric and through materiality. Materiality here refers to physicality, the located body, and embodied capital. Creating this work one beaded sphere at a time, one strand at a time, placing each strand deliberately, one at a time. In the end, the laboring body is present because of its conspicuous absence. The viewer's body, is this video gonna work? Oh my God, it's the circle. The viewer's body takes center stage as they confront arched entryways that they cannot enter, a wall of beads presented on an interior wall, as their breath and movement shifts the strands, which are precariously balanced in place, and as their desire to touch and possess is denied. Now it's going to play the video on a loop. I kept that train of thought going in my next site-responsive installation, Band, Bond, Bend, and Bind, which is intentionally a tongue twister, acts as a material metaphor for the accretive strategies used to transmit, maintain, and reinforce nationalist ideology across time and space. A complex of beaded strands and cloth ties cordons off a bounded space, barring access to the center through the tensile arrangement of materials. Oh, good, you can see it. That's good. Long beaded strands formed catenary arches by being tied to the columns with strips of fabric. Here I was materially representing a border as a fragile fiction. Borders are only strong because we decide to agree they are strong. They're only unbreakable because they are policed. I dared viewers to walk through, to duck under, to step over, or even to rip it all down. I placed an offering to curiosity in the center, tempting viewers to come inside. Once again, the laboring body is conspicuously absent. A stage is set. The audience is both invited and dared to perform the role they decide is theirs. What's mine is yours. What's ours is ours. This exhibition, titled Sculpture as Verb, was inspired by Richard Serra's verb list from 1967. The verb list was an early influence on my practice, if you can't already tell, so I excitedly created a new site-responsive work. Carefully measured beaded strands reference a wall being constructed brick by brick. A few strands peek over one side of the doorway, inviting curiosity. Viewers wonder, how did they get there? How are they attached? Who put them there? Why are they there? Curiosity is the door to criticality. How questions lead to why questions. In this show, which is a big one for me back in 2023, I explored the relationship between materials and their contested cultural meanings. I focused on the construction of nationalist narratives and their role within overlapping projects of political dispossession. I used repetition and patterning to evoke the cyclical history of protectionist political discourse. Through site-responsive installations, I transformed the architecture of the gallery into a site where contradictory narratives meet, and the textile object acts as a multivalent metaphor for the burdens the body must bear. And when I say the body, I mean the individual self and the collective body politic. By manipulating material and spatial contexts, I expose the social tensions that the marginalized subject must confront in the midst of divisive political abstractions. At the same time, I reveal the tenuousness of exclusionary nationalism's fictitious boundaries, envisioning their destruction through the deliberate and incremental building of collective will and transnational solidarities. I showed this piece taken and taking on again, but this time I was able to show it as a long single horizontal line rather than the two-tiered first version. This gallery had a theater lighting setup, so I was able to play with shadows more than the first time, which is exciting. And the double line became even more doubled or tripled or quadrupled. And I also got to turn a corner with the work, which was exciting. This piece was 10 years in the making, and it's called Draupadi's Debt. It's made of 27 pairs of gray pants cut into strips and pieced together into a gradating pattern of gray shades. It's bound around a stack of walls. The front is lit with stark, cold white light, and the stepped side invites you to walk around to the back. The back is lit with a really dim, warm tone, and you feel you have peeked behind the theater's curtain or entered a space of intimacy where the truth is revealed. The garment doesn't actually fit the body, and it's only attached with a single clamp. Again, the viewer is dared to undo the work. If I had time, I'd give you a whole lecture about Draupadi, who's a character from the Mahabharata, an epic myth that supposedly tells the story of the creation of the nation of India. I made this strange little sculptural series riffing on Montessori teaching tools for math education. 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot cubed. These are building block toys, and they're little interior forts that kids can activate with their imaginations. I was thinking about how we're taught the rules, how we're taught how to build things and which structures you're allowed to inhabit, and how you're taught not to enter or play on private property. The strands are doubled. The front side is made of matte black glass beads, and the inside is made from beads that are colorful and tempting, swaying and sparkling in the air conditioner's breeze and in the theatrical lighting. This wall drawing with bead strands refers to bunting, which is the ornamental fringe that's often used to decorate the edges of a stage for a political rally. So I think in this country, as well as in my homeland of the US, it'd be red, white, and blue. Yeah. And it would be paper or fabric frills on the edge of that stage. This strand is also a ruler, a measuring device, an ordering device. A centimeter of colorful beads interrupts the black beaded strands, creating horizontal lines from what appears to be a random layout of loopy lines. I don't know if you can see those. The line of beads seems to be continuous, but it's not. I used small magnet clasps to create a continuous line that's easily taken apart and put back together again. Each time it will be different. There was no fixed plan for this improvised material drawing other than to make sure those little bits of color roughly lined up with each other. And then finally, the centerpiece of the show, a remix of that earlier work from Milwaukee, the title reshuffled. And this time I used fabricated steel hardware and partial walls instead of columns and fabric strips. The first time it was possible to enter this space inside. This time it was not. The interior was completely inaccessible unless you dared to destroy the strands, which no one did. I have to take a minute to note that this was a big show and all these people helped me. And the space also had an education team who created this response to my work with the hundreds of children who came to see the show. They came to the show and they weren't allowed to touch the work with their hands, even though I was intentionally daring them to. And seeing this collective interactive sculpture where they made beads with their hands out of clay and then put it on strands of fabric, seeing this was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. At the end of last year, I showed several works in very new configurations. For example, this is a vinyl piece called Squaring Circles that I've been able to show in different ways since 2016. It's a modular piece, so it's always reconfigured in response to the particular interior architecture of a space. A couple other highlights for me in this show was this remix of the cube piece. So an artist named Abby Hodson helped me to create wooden armatures that appeared to be emerging from the wall, and the beaded strands were draped over those armatures. These armatures refer to body parts like arms and shoulders. They conjure bones or fingers or just clothing hangers. The arched beaded forms hint at windows, doors, secret entryways, or escape routes. And again, the matte black beads are on the outward facing side, and the colorful side is in an interior triangular space, tempting you to come inside. And then I had an opportunity to remix this piece from the Richard Serra show, and this became the title for the whole show. Previously, it had draped over a partial wall with the door opening, but this time viewers couldn't access the backside. It was a storage space. I used the beaded lines to draw a door-like shape, and the lines disappeared over the top of the wall. The pattern created by the beaded spheres refers to stairs, ladders, bricks, maybe the way one might tie bed sheets together to make a rope for escaping buildings. But if you tried to grab one of these lines, you would only destroy the art. Cloaked in the language of abstraction and post-minimalism, with the title as a clue, this piece is about migration, national borders, and the concept of potentiality in relation to abolitionist politics. Earlier this year, I participated in 2 very different art fairs, a tiny one and a big one. So Plural, the big one is what you'd expect, booths in a big conference center. Barely Fair in Chicago is a miniature version. It's a challenge to the economies of scale and logistics that traditional art fairs contend with. So the artists at Julius Caesar, have you ever gone to this? It's so cool. They make this lineup of 20-inch square booths and invite galleries to invite an artist to show. So I made this. It was really exciting. It's a 1 inch to 1 foot scale, so it gave me the opportunity to imagine making a monumental scale installation. The shift in format and scale inspired me to work with materials, colors, and objects that I would never have dreamed of using before, like the color of Aaron's shoes is in this piece. Okay, I'm almost at the end here. Finally, for another recent show, last year I was invited by artist Patrick Howlett to collaborate on a two-person show. Inspired by our shared dedication to the dot motif, we spent several months passing materials back and forth and just doing studio visits with each other. This project, as all collaborations do, allowed me to expand on a familiar method in an unanticipated way. So I went back to using repurposed fabric from discarded garments, but this time I pieced together blank canvases. Separated from a wearer, these reconfigured textiles were anonymized, yet dense with lived history. I then hand-painted dot patterns across their surfaces, one dot after another, one dot at a time. I also created curved arch-like wooden armatures to support the draped textiles, to refer to the absent body that's marked with imperfections, yet adaptable and resilient. The resulting forms suggested tongues, mouths, hips, heads. This project gave me the opportunity to conduct some initial research into polka dot textiles and their cultural multivalency. I'm especially fascinated with how the polka dot pattern is used to represent gender in relation to nebulous and shifting ideals of morality, innocence, and transgression. This is the work I'm currently working on in my studio. I'm expanding this body of work, and I'm introducing color. These were all gray and white, with some blue. Following work that tackled urgent and heady topics like nationalism and migration, at first considering the humble polka dot felt too small or too minor. But as with every seemingly marginal but ubiquitous subject I've worked with, that perception of inconsequence is a clue to the motif's real significance. Pattern and decoration are symbolic languages that hide in plain sight. The materials we choose to adorn our bodies and spaces with can tell us much about the kinds of social, political, and cultural worlds we have constructed. Common motifs are a starting point for investigating common sense, revealing the powerful undercurrents of hegemonic ideas and myths in the basic materials and visual landscapes of daily life. In other words, I'm obsessed with dots right now, if you can't tell. So it's really been an exceptionally busy 5 years. I've had the honor of working with such incredible collaborators throughout all of these projects. I'm not going to show you everything else I did, but I invite you to visit my website to see if you'd like to check out 2 other projects. The first is a mini retrospective with that title that I love, What's Mine is Yours. I worked with an amazing curator named Pan Wendt to show both solo and collaborative projects. This show took place in the actual building where the nation of Canada was signed into existence by European colonizers. So the room next door was where they signed the paperwork to confederate the nation of Canada. It's really, really intense. The show included a few pieces that were made in collaboration with other artists. Sarah Nance, Maida Butt, and Ann Wilson as another way to explore shared authorship and undercut the myth of the artist's genius that a solo show often reinforces. I also got to make my first digital art piece and curate a collaborative virtual exhibition during the pandemic, funded by Canada Council for the Arts. But of course, as an artist who's stubbornly committed to creating art with everyday materials, I tested the website in my hotel here last night and it didn't work. So I'm not sure if maybe it doesn't work in the Netherlands, or maybe it's because it was an unsecure network at my hotel. But whatever it was, it fits with the curatorial framework that I wanted to work within for the project. Just to give you a little quote from the essay, what is presented here is a beginning, and it might be wrong. Certainly it is wrong according to the logic of the privatized internet's attention economy, where culture is reduced to fungible bait and everything must scale. Intro-narration instead speculates about how the internet could function as an exploratory site for art making and art documentation, how it can be seen as a system for organizing and accessing information, guided by curiosity, but grounded in the resolutely material, and how contemplating scale doesn't just mean cornering the market, but taking seriously the finite and infinite properties of time and space. So if you get on a good, secure network, please visit intro-narration. And I'm at the end, and I'm going to conclude with a silent video that was part of that digital art project. This is a video that is another way of visualizing the process of triangulation. So I'm just going to play it. It's just a few seconds. Thank you. 30 minutes. Can't believe I did that in 30 minutes.
Hey. That was great. Thank you both so much. Incredible talks, like so cool and rich. I'm not totally sure how we're gonna do this with the Q&A with the live stream. Maybe Sky, you can help me. Okay. Yeah. So we have some time to take some questions. Maybe we can start here and then we'll see what comes through from Montreal. But I was just, maybe I can just start and respond and just absorbing, like I said, such a really rich kind of constellation of a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of very, I feel like, works that are very rooted in quite heavy consequential social context and questions, and which I think you both really work with in a very elegant way. But Surabhi, you mentioned, you know, the word futility at times. That feels, we're as artists working in quite dark times in many ways. I think in all of the context that both of you spoke to, I don't know, maybe just, and I think these conversations also often happen with students, right? Like the feeling that sometimes art might not be enough to meet the darkness or the heaviness of the time. And I think you both approach this in a lot of really interesting ways, but maybe if you could respond to this very heavy question and talk,
Are you
you know,
does art matter?
And art
yeah, maybe, no, but I think it's obvious that it matters through your work, but I don't know, maybe just ways that you've been reflecting on this. I think in both of your practices, current events and world events and history are really important. And I don't know, maybe
I mean,
riff off.
you make me think about, like, there was a point in the pandemic where I was like, art doesn't matter. Like, what are we doing? somehow I emerged from the pandemic convinced of the opposite, though. Like, I think art matters a lot. And I think one of the signs, so my research, well, and yours is touching on it too, is currently like, well, it's for about 10 years, really since like Modi appeared like on the scene in India, Trump appeared on the scene in the US, and a new party appeared on the scene in Quebec as well. And because I'm obsessed with triangulation, I was like, what's going on, right? And the right wingers give us the clue. Like, they hate art. They hate art. They hate us. And they hate education. And they hate abstractions, even though they use them all the time. So all these things currently, I know that's not a very positive way to think about it, but at the moment, the fact that they don't want this to happen is my motivation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fiery and true. I mean, I think something I would add is like a lot of similar thoughts and a lot of big feelings, especially post-pandemic. I think that I mean, like doing 2 community-facing projects and having a lot of questions about what like social practice looks like, community art looks like. And along, I mean, I realized it very early in the Queer Kudzu project that I worked on is that I have never promised or like want those projects to like save anyone or do the work that actual like socially progressive organizations do, or orgs that actually work on housing crises and food insecurity. And you know, that project, I mean, it's so like I have so many critiques of archives. Those have only grown stronger since the pandemic times, I would say too, in the ways in which they're instrumentalized. But I really just saw that as like a kind of intervention and like an artist approach. And even how I use archives has like changed, I think, in these times too, and both because of these projects, you know, like for into like the present day project, I didn't necessarily set out to like do such a deep dive in the history of medicine, but that's like definitely where the research went, and it is kind of mind-boggling how like little actually a lot of this history is like contained, shared, brought out, and dissected. So yeah, I don't know if that, I mean, where do I sit with the futility? I mean, as a person, just like an artist, but also just as a person, I I guess like try to head as best I can, like towards the light, like towards the human, like towards the kind of spaces where social progress is possible, where I do have, if even a small impact, which sounds kind of like a cheesy thing, but it is like how I live my life. Um, so I don't know. I sit with the futility. I mean, like the way that queer rights are just being just completely disabused at this moment. Um, it's hard to do this work to encounter people at the same time. Like the Queer Kudzu Project is being shown in my home region at a small museum about Appalachian history, and the people who have shown up to that have been really surprising, and it's like very clearly like a source of something that's not the trauma that they're living through right now. So I think bringing people together is not something other than being a teacher. It's not something I ever imagined doing, but I don't know, one way I counter it, I guess, is just looking and resourcing from being a teacher, but also being from big families and being around people who like sociality, storytelling was like, that was their art form.
Absolutely. I think with both of your work, the art making as this language that is this very active way of coming together and talking, that's not, you're talking about the atomization of social media and kind of having information and stories kind of given to you or consumed. There's a much more active way of kind of, I think that's clear in both of the ways that you work. There's a really active way of coming together of art as a language, actually, to like really be in something rather than subject to it or yeah. I wonder if we can take some questions,
I have
Florian.
a question that directly relates to what you just said. Then I wonder, especially in your presentation, since there's so much work from marginalized communities that you incorporate, is the art presentation for you the endpoint, or do you also have other ways of giving back to the communities? Or I was especially thinking of your project with the zines.
Mhm.
You know, are the zines just something, or also the gay bar?
Yeah.
Does it end up in the white cube, or does it go anywhere from there?
No, thank you for the question. It's like if and maybe I should have made that choice to just talk about one project. Might have been more deep. But actually a lot of the archives that the archive portion of that work started with, those relationships have been maintained, and a number of the leaves that were made, the vines, the quilted vines that were made, are sort of promised to about 6 different archives. And the intention that's been exciting for me and the current project that I shared too, like the plants that I made based on other people's designs are going back to those people. So I'm really interested in reciprocity, largely writ, but also in those exchanges. Let's say the exhibition is not the endpoint. When I was first moving to Canada and thinking about these sort of new transition life-wise, but also for that project, I really wanted to actually find someone kind of like either your sister or the team of people that you built this really awesome. And I have used the website, and I do encourage people to go see it. It is a really interesting model. And one thing I love about it, side note, is that it's like I would have never expected from your practice something like that, but it is also so like that is you. You love to like share stories, and like we saw some of that in here, but that's also like a core thing in your practice too. And like making space for other people's stories, which is what that project is, just so everyone knows. Like but I wanted to build something like that because there is like tons of documentation just made along the way, like with permission from people and at people's insistence. A lot of times people want to be photographed holding their thing because they don't, it goes on to this communal vine. They don't leave with it. So I think hopefully that answers the question. Yeah, but it's something that's always like present in that. And I myself have a really unusual sense of, or I don't know if it's unusual, but for me it is authorship to those works. Like how they're disseminated is not really like always like my name attached to them. In fact, it's like really suppressed in the exhibition that's on campus right now because a lot of it is other people's contributions. So.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh, we need to repeat the questions.
Oh, from here too. Okay. Is it this mic?
Or you could say your question and
And I can repeat it. Yeah. Yeah. Be easier.
When I first started listening to you talking about piecework, I was thinking PEACE. Because I hadn't done my homework in preparation. So it was always piecework and quilt making and charts and fragments. And so I had this undercurrent of question in my mind as you're talking always about what happens with conflict. So you bring together people and people bring their fragments, and the fragments may make a small wall. Does this happen? How do we deal with these situations where bringing together communities actually involves exposing conflict rather than immediately being able to make something together and a lovely kind of composition emerge?
Yeah, great question. So
a long question.
I'm going to boil it down to the last part, which I think was very concise. What happens when the question was, what happens when bringing together people brings conflict to the surface, and that needs to be addressed in the context of a collaboration? Yeah, more or less.
thinking specifically in terms of the quilt
Yeah,
pieces
okay,
and piece. So I think there's just an interesting play there.
yeah. The tool, sort of dual, was it, piece, PIEC and PEACE. Yeah, how do these relate in the piecework?
First, I want to thank you for the question. It is a really good question, and actually, it is something that I encounter all the time. Not at the, I mean, to use like to invoke war. I understand where you're coming from with like where our fragments of identity or our identities themselves, fragmentary or whole, collide in something. I mean, that is so present in these like anti-immigration era we find ourselves in. Something that happens very often in that project is that a group, an intergenerational group of queer people come together, and there are very conflicting fragments. In the longer version of this talk, I often share about a couple of different projects that I was a part of. One of them is called the Monument Quilt, and I actually encourage you to check it out. It's really cool. They have a website, and they worked together with survivors of sexual assault in publicly sharing their stories of sexual assault as a way to confront rape culture. It is a very North American context for that, but they worked on building a la the way the AIDS quilt, a giant message on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. I had a lot of training on working with sexual assault survivors through that project because I was invited to be a part of it to help people quilt. It's also quilting focused. And when I am starting the project that I have been working on in Gewese Queer Kudzu, it was a moment to really kind of put into play some of that like trauma response, like therapy at a site of someone being traumatized or re-traumatized. And so something that I have liked doing, and I'm not an expert, but when I do these workshops, because it is common that I might not be part of that community. I have been invited in to do something, even sometimes when it's the city you live in. It's like the youth support group, but I'm not a teenager. So, and I'm not part of their like community immediately of volunteers. So it's always important. I always pay people from those communities to like help me do that work and also help spread the word and like introduce people to what the project is and what these kinds of stories and then why it's important to come together. I've had a lot of like conflict of older queer people, especially older gay men who don't even like that the word queer is a part of the name of the project, but they want to come and they want to share something about their lives. They want to contribute. And younger baby queers who like have lived a totally different non-binary, like total disregard for gender. So they're in a very different place with conversations around these things. And so one of the coolest things that happens if you actually, in my experience with this project, bring people together and you are actually doing something manual with them, I think it really, I mean, this is proven, it does release a different form of serotonin and suppresses cortisol in our bodies. So I think that it does make a different kind of space for people with very different ideologies to be in a space together and think differently. And I don't know if that answers your question. I said earlier, I don't think this project is saving anybody. I think it's offering a platform or a space for people to come together in situations like this that are facilitated and contribute to like their own queer history, future archives that are in a different form, right? Not just papers in a box. You know.
That's great. Thank you. Do we have more questions from the Rotterdam side? Should we look at the Montreal side? Yeah, Miriam?
I'm fascinated by your, as coordinator of the research station, by your mind map and triangulation and how it all grows and then got through it and I love it. So I'm wondering how do you take the step from all that like mind work to speak to your artistic work and the beautiful like works that we saw and Yeah, can you share a little bit about your process?
Process. Sure.
Yeah.
If there is such a process.
Yeah.
Very much.
So the question, should I repeat it? Yeah. So the question for Surabhi was what's the process of translation from the sort of mind mapping into kind of the practical making, more or less, right? Yeah.
No, no. It's a great question. I think the map, I have like 10 answers. So I think the map, like, it kind of gives me permission to be intuitive and instinctual in the studio. And it, I, so if I hit a moment in making where I have to choose a path or I have to decide, I think all the artists in the room will relate to hitting moments where we're like, is this enough? Is this too much? Is this too complicated? Is this too simple? You know, we sort of we're creating spectrums for ourselves with like 2 points on the ends, and we're worried that we're going too far to those ends. As I always tell students, like, you can't stop yourself, though. You have to actually do the too far in order to prove what it is to yourself, right? And then you can pull back if you think it's necessary. So the map kind of functions like that for me. Like, I get to think about, like, how is this too big? Like, am I being too broad? Am I being too, you know, like, ambitious? Am I like being too complicated? And the map sort of gives me a way to be like, yes and no to that question, you know? The part of my process that I really skimmed over is all the like visual research that I do. So like, for example, you know, I've done like tons of work that's based on looking into like the arch form, right? Everything from like the catenary arch, which I first encountered in Gaudi's work, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, is all based in the catenary arches, to like arched entryways like Victory arches in Paris, and there's a bunch in India that were built by the British. So like all those sorts of forms that are like all about physics, right? Like holding structures up, how we can support weight and burdens and build these sort of structures and that we inhabit and move through and move around. So like, that's a whole other like side that's for me, it's in that map too. So yeah, the map just gives me, it's like I gave myself permission to just like do whatever I feel drawn to and follow curiosities and identify patterns in my own curiosities. And I think one of the reasons why I'm really enjoying this polka dot painting thing is because it's like, I just sit at my desk, my table, and draw circles and paint them in. That's it. Like, that's all I'm doing. It's like so simple in a way, but it's also extremely time consuming. With every single one, I'm like, I'm towing a line of like control or lack of control of paint on fabric, liquid on fabric. I don't gesso the fabric, so it's like, you know, this really like sort of like it's really applying it to and it's mostly it's denim, so it's a twill weave, it's not a plain weave like canvas for painters. So I sort of sit there and like nerd out on all that too, right? I don't know if I'm answering your question.
That's
But
interesting. It's
yeah.
not the answer. I don't know what I expected, but not that map like that, which seems so intricate and you know filled with concepts and relations and I don't know what, that allows you to become more intuitive in your studio.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like language is really important to me. So it's also like a way to use language as like touchstones, and to think about, as I said in the script that I wrote, like it reminds me that complexities and contradictions are ever present. And so I can, if I feel like I'm doing something that's too simple or like too basic, I can remind myself that there's no such thing as that. Yeah.
Great answer. The map, it's also the map comes after the practice too. It's not as if the map shows the way to make the work. It is a result of having done years of work and then reflecting and visualizing it in another way.
Totally.
Sorry.
Oh, I just want to add, it's similar what Danny was saying, but as someone who knows a longer like period of your practice too, it's always when you first started making those, I'm remembering in the Garlandine and Guys show or the book, but I think it's just a really beautiful visual tool for understanding the practice that doesn't rely on like a heavy amount of text. And I really appreciate it more as like an audience, like a viewer of the work, but also not just for one work. I like that it was interesting to me to see the lines that might shoot through for one work, like how you're using it. This is my first time kind of seeing that, but I've seen the map and anyways, I think it's like we're in a famous design school. Like, I think it's great to sort of see these things in live play.
It's also, it's also just making hexagons.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing about it. It's like so
pattern
just
on
about
pattern. Yeah.
And like, thinking about how if you have 3 dots and you make a triangle and then you layer another triangle on top, like it's also just about like structure and form and how those can accumulate and that how you can think about things from like a micro or a macro perspective in terms of pattern, motif and pattern.
Mhm. Absolutely.
It's kind of formal, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it's formal too, which I think I'm a formalist.
Mm. Great questions. Maybe there's time for one more. Yes? Yeah, from here, from Montreal. I think we have a few more minutes.
Come on, Montreal, represent.
We've had some people coming and going here in the space, but we don't have any questions here at the moment.
On YouTube more than Zoom,
Yeah.
I guess.
Also on Zoom, if anyone wants to pop a question in the chat, we can read it out.
I think a lot was said. Maybe we're full and of the richness of your two's work. So I think maybe that's a good place to wrap things up. I want to thank both Aaron and Surabhi and everyone joining in Montreal and all of you for being here. And tomorrow, workshop. Do you want to say anything about the workshop happening tomorrow, or?
Yeah, it's called
Shape-shifting
textiles. And we're gonna do a little exercise in making rope out of yarn.
Line-based.
And then an exercise in
Piecework, yeah, patchwork. Yeah, we'll look at the crazy patchwork formation.
And we'll be in the fabric station, so people will then have a chance to get their hands involved with both rope making or piecing. Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for everyone joining us on Zoom and on YouTube also. We're going to be closing up our live stream now, but just a reminder that remains available on our YouTube channel. We're going to make a couple edits too also, but remains there, so you should revisit it and you should reshare it, and you should also have a wonderful evening. We're going to have a good day. Thanks everyone. Thanks Aaron. Thanks Surahbi. Thanks Danny. Sky and Veronica, great job.
You're so good.
You're so
Oh my God.